This young man with an extremely handsome but dejected face is our protagonist, Alone. He used to be a slave working 78 hours a week, and now he has been reborn into the body of a noble in a fantasy world. Sounds great, right? Well, it is, except the character he inhabited is illiterate and has no talents at all, spending his days only eating and playing, living uselessly like a baron's son. The only exception was that he didn't know where he was. Just as Alone was enjoying the attention of the maidservants, one maid beside him reminded him, "Sir, you should rest early. Our young masters will return tomorrow." Alone, surprised, asked which young masters. The maid replied in astonishment, "Young Master Leo and young Master Tonio. You speak as if you've never heard of the Palacio family." Hearing that name, Alone immediately froze solid. The Palacio family, he felt a sudden chill. The name was disturbingly familiar. The maids looked at him with concern. "Master." Alone pressed his face down in anxiety. Could this really be psychedelia? Alone remembered the title of a game he'd played, the game he used his rare free moments to play. Back when he was an office slave, it was a turn-based role-playing game. No matter which storyline the player began with, once the 5 great sins appeared, wrath, greed, sloth, pride, and obsession, the kingdoms, noble houses, and cities would begin to collapse catastrophically. Among them, the Palacio baronial family stood out. They were a decadent noble house that appeared in a side quest before the main storyline officially began. Alone sank to his knees, collapsing. Right, he knew this place all too well. He searched his memory for information about the family. Alone looked at the grand manor before him in despair. Seriously? Why the Palacio barons? The first to be destroyed by the 5 great sins. Please, let me go back to being a slave working 78 hours a week. What's the point of living in luxury if in 10 years everyone falls? This feels worse than being unpaid for half a year. Why does someone who transmigrated like me have no privileges at all? Wait, privileges? Right, knowing the game's plot 10 years in advance basically means I know the future. Doesn't it? If so, I just need to remove the causes of destruction before they happen. So, to enjoy a peaceful, noble life, he decided to reform the 5 great sins. He told himself they're probably still children. Maybe there's still a chance to save them? 2 months later, in his study, he reported, "I rescued orphans in the East. More precisely, victims turned into living test subjects. Among them, I appointed a girl named Yusha to manage the orphanage." Alone smugly thought, "My eyes don't fail me. She really is capable." She replied, "Yes, sir." But was that a compliment? Since the young master never shows emotion on his face, he nodded. "That's right. Then Evan, from now on I expect you to assist me more." Evan stammered. "This is hard to get used to." Alone looked at his face in the mirror and thought, "This face used to be very expressive, but it seems only the outward expression isn't fully synced." Evan is one of the rare supporting characters in the game. He's a loyal man, so Alone recruited him. He said, "In any case, thank you for the compliment, young master, but this time you said the raid was to rescue the girl named Yusha, right?" Alone answered, "Yes." Evan continued, "I must admit I now understand why you chose her. Even with my seasoned eye, having wandered years among mercenaries, that girl is by no means ordinary." He recalled the scene when they entered the prison to free the children. Evan was astonished. "The girl was so strong I couldn't understand why she meekly allowed herself to be imprisoned like that. Why didn't you bring her back here? Wouldn't keeping her be more advantageous for you?" Alone agreed. A fair observation. He fell into thought. On the surface it seemed I was wasting a source of power by not using it. But leaving her as is also part of the plan. She is a bloodline that made a pact with an indescribable otherworldly entity, possessing unfathomable power. And later she would become Wrath, one of the 5 great sins, causing the deaths of hundreds. But if the girl is raised in a peaceful environment, she surely will not walk the path of destruction. That way I removed the first ticking bomb. Now I just need a reason not to bring her back. Alone said, "Yes, that's right." He pressed with his hand, emphasizing, "Because the time is not yet right." Evan exclaimed in surprise, "The time is not yet right?" Alone nodded. "Correct. Make sure this incident doesn't leak and provide for the girl fully." He acknowledged, "Yes, I understand." Suddenly he produced an item. "Oh, and give this to Yusha." Evan asked, "It's a letter? Is the content important?" Alone replied, "It's just a note of concern. The girl went through horrific biological experiments, so I thought a little comfort might calm her." He received it. "You even write letters like this? I'll deliver it carefully." After that, he stood by the window watching Evan ride away. Alone worried. I don't know if it will truly comfort her. The real meaning hidden in that note is something he'd heard over and over while playing the game. This is the incantation that helps befriend the bloodline, so it should have a calming effect. Wrathful sin, be at peace. The sorrow of darkness, the oblivion of light, one talent, one bond. These are all chants that appear in Wrath's storyline. But by then she had completely turned black, she was cold, it was already too late. In the game, after failure it transitions into a battle, but now, with everything still 10 years away, it might not be too late. Alone stretched and complained. One of the 5 death signals has been removed, so is it time for the next one? Thinking that a single chant could befriend a monster is laughable. But after all, they're a race that worships the otherworldly, so it's possible it works. Those in the extremist circles of the zealots have minds that are hard to grasp. Elsewhere, Yusha sat silently holding the letter. Evan was startled. Mana was still emanating from the girl, which was absurd, but the girl bore a strange expression, as if she had no emotions at all. She spoke. "You sent that letter, Sir Alone, didn't you? Why didn't he call me to his side?" He panicked inside. "What the hell is this?" Evan stammered. That, he looked at Yusha. Mana manifesting visibly can only happen at a master level. He remembered your words. "The time is not right." Evan hurriedly said, "Oh right, it's because the timing wasn't right." She then withdrew the killing intent. The letter's contents. "Remember this. The sorrow of darkness and the oblivion of light will gradually fade." Yusha moved. "That must be a promise only the master knows." "All right, I roughly understand." He was terrified, sweat running over his body, on high alert. She smiled eerily. "I will follow his will." Meanwhile, you were lying on the bed. Today was truly satisfying. Even the bright moon seemed to cheer me on. I have to keep going for the next round. On this side, the stack of books on the shelf fell onto Alone's head. He squatted on the floor and sighed. "There's nothing here either. Hunting for clues about the third threat is giving me a headache." Evan ran over and said, "Young master, we've rescued the second child you mentioned." There was already a bump on his head. He said, "Really? You treated the child kindly, right?" He replied, "Of course." After that child was taken out of the illegal slave market, suddenly someone burst through the door and kicked it open. A violent man entered and said, "Isn't this the place?" This was the second son of Baron Palacio, Tonio. He whistled and said, "Why is an illiterate like you holding a book?" "Oh right, I heard you've been studying lately, haven't you?" He glared and replied, "Your brother's the one leaving." He thought to himself that the guy was always a nuisance. How did Alone put up with this before? I wanted to strike back, but immediately acted obedient, lowered my head and said, "It seems you still want to use the library, so I'll take my leave." Tonio then stepped on his head smugly. "You know your place?" "Huh?" Suddenly a throwing knife flew past him. Looking closer now, the knife was embedded in the wall. At that moment someone entered from afar and said, "You pests are making too much noise." Tonio felt irritated. "What the hell?" The eldest young master entered, pointed at them sternly and said, "I don't want to see blood first thing in the morning, so clear out." This was Leo Palacio, the eldest son. Immediately the two lunged at each other. "Brother, I told you to stop that rude attitude when entering the library." Leo replied, "Get lost while you still can." Alone quietly slipped away. The Palacio domain had quickly vanished from the game. Alone recalled his mission, investigate the Palacio domain of the Kingdom Mysterial. This place was a territory rife with vices, run by an ancestor named Avalon, but their power was greater than he expected. Essentially, these rotten brothers were fighting for head of the family. Big figures from the underworld and the rest were running a large-scale drug enterprise. Alone thought to himself that he couldn't risk his life confronting those two. So Alone and Evan silently let the two fight each other and slipped out. At that moment the library echoed with brutal fighting, objects flying everywhere. Evan straightened his hair for him. Alone quietly resolved to live happily as the weak, useless, illegitimate son. After that he returned to his room and groaned wearily, although the second child did seem no ordinary kid. Alone was relaxing when he inexplicably turned and looked at him. Seeing this, Evan was inwardly puzzled. How could someone like him know about the illegal slave market? And about the secret biological experiments happening in other regions? How on earth did he find out? On the other side he yawned lazily, perplexed. It seemed he was struggling to control himself. He stayed in bed whining, "I'm so tired." Evan suddenly spoke up. "Young master, you're really strange. You sent that child to the orphanage." Alone didn't look at him. He couldn't help thinking. Didn't he say that child wasn't ordinary? That boy wasn't just extraordinary. He carried destructive level power. Within an imperial alliance made up of many nations, its central state was the Kingdom of Callian. The child we rescued from the illegal slave market was the second boss of psychedelia, Deus Macallian. After being sold into slavery and tortured, as he was moved from place to place, he became the incarnation of one of the 5 great sins, sloth. He transformed into something demonic. After that, He destroyed nations in the most horrific ways imaginable. It was this chapter of the storyline that left many players shocked by the game's brutality. Contrary to the title of Sloth, he was recorded as extremely diligent and would repay both favors and grievances many times over. That's why I had to emphasize to Evan to treat Deus very well. He trembled, holding his teacup, and marveled. It's so vivid, Alone said calmly. The reason I sent him to the orphanage is that the time isn't right yet. Evan replied, I thought of that earlier. So the letter you sent Yusha was about the second child? Alone recalled the letter and answered, yes, and I also mentioned some guidance. He recounted, I told the girl to look after the somewhat frail child I sent. His figure there looked truly solitary, his whole body covered in wounds. At that moment a pair of small feet approached and said, You, a clear voice rang out from behind Deus. Are you broken? The voice remained calm. It was the mark of that thing. His hand moved slightly. Yusha appeared before Deus and asked, You're the Black Sun, aren't you? She smiled and continued, Yet the great moon still chose you. Congratulations. Yusha wore a wicked, witch-like smile, magic radiating from her. So feel the power that has been granted and let your potential be unleashed. She reached toward Deus and smiled. If you keep your loyalty and obey his commands, you will be avenged. At that moment, strands of magic gradually emanated from his back. Yusha smiled and looked up at the letter. Now I should send my first reply. Under the moonlight, Alone's lines of message appeared. She wanted to send him a gentle greeting. At the Baron's manor where they lived, Evan burst through the door. Alone was still muttering. Where is the third person, after all? He suddenly said, Sir, there's big trouble. Evan continued, That scoundrel. No, I mean the second young master. Alone heard that and looked up. What? You mean that one's dead? At that moment, the second young master's death had come as a complete surprise. Really? After that, they gathered at the venue for the second young master's funeral. At that time, two beautiful girls standing on either side of Baron Palacio cooed. Master, the other one groaned too. When will this end? I'm so bored. The woman beside him chimed in. I'm hungry. Alone was speechless. Bringing drugs and women to your son's funeral? I knew this family was rotten, but this is pure dark fantasy. Alone looked down at his brother. Anyway, Tonio dying from an accidental fall. This doesn't match what I remember. Back in the game, the one beside him was the killer. Finally, I killed that vermin after 50 years. Now I'm the legitimate heir. The title is Baron Palacio. He wept theatrically, saying he'd finally killed that one after all those years. And yet his face looked like he'd won a great opportunity. Alone glanced over helplessly. At least try to hide your expression. The mastermind was definitely Leo or his lackeys. Anyway, he stared at the man in the coffin. I only need to deal with 5 great sins. Time moved forward a year. With the succession issue resolved and Leo taking over the drug trade, the baronial domain became noticeably more peaceful. At that time Alone and Evan sat facing each other. Evan kept eating from his plate. Alone glanced at the stack of papers and thought, in the meantime, Yusha and I have become pen pals. If I keep in touch with her, it could be useful later. In the letter, Yusha began, Yuna is great at hide-and-seek, Hayden excels at battle games. Deus is growing normally and the boy loves chaotic seasons. Alone read and smiled slightly. They all seemed like good kids. Below was the list of this month's sponsors. When Alone saw it, he exclaimed. The list increased again. It's interesting to see so many patrons appearing for that small orphanage. Evan added, odd. But anyway, it's a good thing. Oh right, about the thing you've been searching for. Evan continued. I got a call from the Information Guild. They found a lead. Hearing that, he ate as he said. Really? What a relief. It's surely a list connected to the third boss. I can finally find him. At that moment, light from the window flooded the room. The two fell silent, each attending to his own task. Elsewhere, pitiful scream rang out. This was the Margot drug distribution point. As two men advanced, they remarked, the Palacio fish is generous. He always gives us hefty rewards. The companion replied, indeed, our organization now has a few hundred members. Before them were the murdered people. In an instant, seeing the scene, they recoiled in shock. Those there cried out in agony. No, my hand's out of control. Help. What followed was a horror. Everyone there simultaneously took their own lives. Wails echoed. Nearby, a silhouette stood silently in the shadows. Yusha appeared behind them and said, I love today's puppet show. It seems there's still much to report. Seeing her, Deus turned to ask, do these acts have any meaning? Yusha turned to him. Do you pity them? Deus answered, no, because they used others to manufacture drugs. I just don't know if this ties into my vengeance. She replied, of course it's useful. We're creating space for his return. Yusha gave a wicked smile. How could we let this place look shabby when he arrives? Deus responded expressionlessly. Understood. Then the two activated magic. A swirling wind rose and they vanished. They drifted like ghosts through the night. Everything would proceed according to his will. Then a flash of light streaked brilliantly across the night. Under the peaceful crescent moon, Yusha's voice rang out. We of the blue moon will be his sword. When it was over, no one remained there. Only a deep crater was left on the ground. It had been 2 years since he became pen pals with Yusha when Evan dragged his tired frame over. Where are you, sir? Evan collapsed onto the grass. I'm back. Turns out you were in the backyard. Got it. Alone said nonchalantly. Oh my, Evan, you startled me. He signaled and said, the 5th child has been safely sent to the orphanage. Hearing that, he was extremely surprised. By that time, the other 3 sins had already been rescued. He handed food to Evan. Here, eat. Evan, yes thank you sir. As Alone handed Evan the food, he thought about finding the 3rd one. Greed was a bit tricky, but with his gamer knowledge and Evan's thorough digging, everything worked out in the end. After giving him the food, he said, you did very well running around like that. Now you can rest a bit. Evan asked, is the orphanage mission finished? Alone matter-of-factly, yeah, it's done, thank goodness. Evan lay down and sighed, asking, but isn't the young master unhappy today? A little. He said you don't look quite yourself. He pointed at his mouth. I'm smiling now. Then he forced a very businesslike smile. Just pretend it is. Sunlight streamed down. He stretched and breathed in. Alone lay on the grass lost in thought. This is going better than I expected. Everything's going smoothly. The masters of the familiars all became the 5 great sins after past tragedies. Although this was established in their past, before they awakened as sins, the chance to perfectly save them all before their tragedies unfolded was very slim. If you rescue them after they've awakened, it's even more worrisome. At that point he asked, how's the orphanage run going? Evan produced a letter. As usual, everything's going smoothly. Evan went on. The children who were like broken dolls at first, he said, have brightened up a bit. Alone opened the letter. Really? Then we won't need any more caregivers. He thought he hadn't expected Yusha to do so well. Maybe it's because her character setup is tied to the moon orphanage. She certainly hates interference. Alone called Evan over. When you look at it that way, Yusha is a good kid too. So what's special about them? In the letter Yusha wrote, everyone's well. A few children here are growing up very pretty. You really don't need to worry about the orders anymore, nor about the children you just sent. After reading the letter, he was genuinely glad to see they were all being raised properly. Alone thought that if all 5 sins grew up normally, the environment really mattered. Evan asked, so when do you plan to meet the kids? You always say you'll have time for that. Alone stammered, that matter. Outwardly he hesitated, but inwardly he didn't intend to meet them directly. It would be better in many ways to be closer to them, but perhaps because the process of becoming a sin was so horrific and tragic, their personalities, as seen in the game's flashbacks, were already terrifying from childhood. He carefully considered, it's true I saved them before awakening, so it should be better, but it's still frightening. He stammered, maybe next year will be fine, I understand. Alone exhaled, anyway, from now on in this horribly dark fantasy world, what you need is some self-defense skills. You think magic requires talent, and as luck would have it, I have it? Evan spoke up. But young master, have you heard of the Blue Moon? Alone replied that he'd never heard of it. Evan explained, they're an organization that's become famous recently for hunting down criminal groups. Hearing that, he asked back, like street sweepers? Sounds like a good thing, but inwardly he thought it's not part of the setup I know, so they'll probably disappear soon. Evan said seriously, but right now they even kill nobles, that's why I thought you might know about them. The young master called to Evan, from tonight you'll sleep beside my room. It's getting late. Moonlight bathed the entire mansion. Voices rose. Now let's hear the weekly report on Blue Moon's activities. Shall we? Yusha nodded and spoke softly. In the north, Xiaolang cheerfully said he'd taken care of everything. He said calmly, the heads of the slave traders. He jumped for joy. See? They didn't even know who I was. I liked the outfit I had made. I told them if they guessed my eye color they'd live, but no one knew. Ryan added that all the bodies had been properly buried. Rodmill, seated on the steps, also said, the south is done too. He said, the illegal human labs and that annoying Avalon group were torn apart with no traces left. Yusha smiled wickedly. Good. Everything is unfolding according to his will. She said, we exist for the glory of the Great Moon. They all belong to the secret Blue Moon Order, worshippers of the Great Moon. However, a problem has arisen. Yusha said, under his guidance everything is perfect. So how can there be a problem? Rodmil said the leader of Avalon is the Baron's eldest son, right? During the Southern Purge, a dangerous document was uncovered. It seems the Baron's eldest is plotting against him. This surprised Yusha, though she showed little. What? A demonic power radiated from her. That's right. Even those nearby had to cower in fear. She held the paper up. After the Baron fell ill and died, he was quietly eliminated with poison. She angrily crumpled the paper. You were right. 2 years later, just as predicted, Baron Palacio passed away. The official cause was announced as cardiac arrest, but given the drug abuse leading to his death, it was obvious. A voice rang out. What? It was the Blue Moon again. Alone listened quietly. Yes, they assassinated him at night. Another murder. Alone thought. It seems people are beginning to be more cautious about the Blue Moon. Moreover, the Baron's funeral had no mourners. It ended quietly in utter silence. Everyone left coldly. Evan spoke up and asked, Young Master, what should we do? Next year the eldest will inherit the title, right? What's all this luggage for? Alone, packing his bags, said, You're moving too. He said, We're leaving. Evan, surprised. Leaving? Are you going to abandon the manor? Alone replied, Not exactly. We're heading south. After packing, Evan asked, South, you mean Rodmil? Right, we're moving to a small village in the southern part of the Palacio territory, Rodmil. Someone was already watching his every move from the upper floor. Leo had watched from beginning to end but said nothing. The fried eggs and fragrant bread sizzled in the pan. He cheerfully fried the eggs until his mouth watered. The two of them's happy life didn't last long. After 3 days, they returned to the Baron's manor. Alone tore at his hair. Now what? Another funeral for the eldest son, he said gloomily. I can't believe it, we're back at this blood-soaked place. The signs of death this time are very different. How could he already be dead? Looking at Leo in the coffin, the cause of death was a sword plunged into his heart. Alone thought, who could it be? Who killed Leo? When he turned to ask about the cause of death, the guards panicked immediately. They jumped back in fear. Sorry for looking at you. Alone froze too. What had suddenly happened to them? Alone pushed through the group. Evan followed, calling, Young Master. He asked softly, Evan, have you found anything? Yes, about that. Young Master, could it be? Evan whispered, Are you the one who wiped out Avalon in one night? Alone, hearing that, turned to look at the servants moving around and only saw their bewildered faces. A few days earlier, on the day they went to Rodmil, Evan said, By the way, Young Master, if you're leaving anyway, wouldn't it be better to pick a city? Alone thought to himself, No, absolutely not. Rodmil is the final location in my plan. You have rescued the 5 great sins from their circumstances and prevented the future destruction of the world. Rodmil has no ties to the original storyline and even has a palatial villa. It's the perfect place to live comfortably as a noble, the perfect place to enjoy a sweet life. Alone said slowly, There's a reason for everything. Evan immediately interrupted. I'm not falling for that again. You always brush it off like that when you're worried. At Evan's sigh, Alone clicked his tongue. Fine. Let's say that's true. The carriage drove out of the Baron's manor. Leo had witnessed it. He thought about whether he should kill him. Either way, whether he stayed or not, he was useless. I considered removing him with poison after his father's death. But Leo thought, since he quietly left for the border, there was no longer a reason to kill him. Thinking that, he told himself it was probably because Avalon's affairs had gone poorly lately. He just stood gripping the railing, still troubled by lingering problems. Then he ordered his servant Alman to follow the carriage. Alman was Leo's right hand. He asked, So you mean you want me to kill him? Leo was suddenly surprised to hear the question. What? He was taken aback. Alman, did the servant follow orders without complaint? Suddenly he asked. Leo snapped. Your duty is to follow my orders. No sooner had he said that than a sword was thrust into his chest. Leo's voice trembled. How dare you betray me? He said. I've enjoyed the civil strife, but this person is Haydn, a member of the Blue Moon organization, not Alman. It's been quite joyful up until now that we've been taught by the Blood Moon. The Blue Moon is his sword. We act according to his will, but if anyone dares to harm the Great Moon. Saying that, he drove the blade deeper into Leo. After stabbing, he decisively pulled the sword from him. We are permitted to act at will. Blood from the sword splattered all over the floor. He watched Leo collapse. That's why I've been waiting for you to say those words all this time. I didn't expect it would take 2 years. Leo even threatened. My men won't let you leave safely. With what you've just said, Avalon will now vanish from the continent forever. He feigned regret toward Leo. What a pity, the Great Moon has given you a chance. After saying that, he leapt from the balcony and disappeared. Dawn began to break, and the sun rose to its work as usual. For Rodmill, it was truly paradise. He woke up cheerfully. Good morning. He rose when he wanted to take in the view of another peaceful day, eat when he wanted, and enjoy the dishes he liked. At last he could enjoy the life of a true noble. While eating, he thought maybe he should start a bread business. Evan entered holding a letter. Young master, a letter has arrived. Taking it, he wondered, what is this? The piece of bread in his hand fell onto the table. The letter stated that after Leo Palacio's death, he was requested to return, and thus his free days in paradise ended in just 3 days. So, sadly standing before his brother's funeral, he returned to the manor once more. Looking at the frightened faces before him, he wondered why everyone reacted that way. Evan spoke up, young master, since when were you the mastermind behind wiping out Avalon? Alone was also stunned by the question. In other words, he had fallen into a recurring simulation. Faced with the crazy situations, Alone sat curled in a corner, dejected. Hey Duong Dung, can you explain to me in a way I can understand why I became the mastermind? Evan said calmly, because you were the only one left alive after this. Leo was murdered after we left the manor. That gives you a perfect alibi and makes you the heir. Alone went blank upon hearing this. He realized the problem. Evan continued. Avalon disappeared. There was no one left to cause trouble over Leo's death. And so, Evan cheerfully said, you became the mastermind of the case with a master swordsman under your command. Are you happy now? What's with that outfit? He thought carefully. Damn, when did I start this? No organization could eradicate a major underworld faction that fast. Alone, now reminded, asked, didn't you say there's an organization that hunts other organizations? Are you referring to the Blue Moon? Right, do you think that's it? Evan believed the intelligence guild said it didn't seem to be them. They said the Blue Moon doesn't leave corpses, but always leaves a mark. Yet Avalon's members were killed by sword. It was a scene like hell on earth. They said that, so it turned out that's why I'm the mastermind with a master swordsman under me. Now he realized, right? The Blue Moon doesn't appear in the game. A weak organization disappearing before the main plot begins couldn't be the culprit. Then who the hell was it? Yusha asked over here if there were any traces. Ryan answered immediately, we left nothing behind. Xiaolang spoke up too. Me as well, same here. He laughed gleefully. It's all corpses over there. At that moment the door opened and a familiar voice called out. We're here. Rodmill's people also arrived. Avalon has 486 members remaining. Rodmill spoke, echoing the boss's intent. He grinned, we cut them in half. After hearing the report, Yusha was very satisfied. Good. Perfect. And so, the vast Avalon organization that once dominated the kingdom of Asteria turned to dust in just 5 days. Rodmill cut in again. However, it seems the cleanup isn't finished. What do you mean? He held up a stack of documents. I found additional nobles connected to Avalon. The Duchy of Asteria appears to have been deeply involved. After hearing this, Yusha fell silent for a moment. She opened the stack Rodmill had brought. She exuded her usual intimidation. You already know what I'm about to say, right? Everyone understood her. They said nothing further. Rodmill said, let's eliminate them quietly. Yusha then exhaled and turned to Ryan. So the Intelligence Guild has everything clear now, right? Ryan picked up a paper and answered, yes, they're treating this as unrelated to the Blue Moon. Deus beside her added, the guilds say the same. They call it a hell made by swordsmen. Hearing that, she asked, are we still monitoring? Yusha smiled slightly. Continue. This matter must absolutely not touch that person. I've said it countless times so everyone knows, right? He made the papers beside him hover and continued. But because that person's kin seemed to target him first, this case isn't in order. Recalling that person's bearing, he said, we are a sword. Hearing that, Yusha's excitement showed as she covered her face and said, a sword mustn't think for itself, right? Her eyes flashed red as she looked toward the window. The Blue Moon must act on command. Remember, this person knows everything. The four across from them tensed and looked up. Her voice was resolute. Never disappoint that person. Deus looked at Yusha, puzzled. I don't understand why someone as capable as Yusha would feel anxious and restless just because they were discovered. Then he raised the stack of papers and said, I understand now, it's all for the Great Moon for that person. At the Baron's manor, lights are still on inside. Alone sat at his desk and complained. I can't do this anymore. He looked up, tears streaming. After the funeral, he'd been extremely busy for a month. Alone sighed. I just want to relax and live off money. That's what nobles do. He looked down and thought to himself that although he caused much hatred, Leo's death would have happened 6 years later anyway. His brother's death had altered the game's timeline, and all the family's affairs fell on him. At that moment a call rang out. The young baron, the elders immediately entered. Each held a stack of items, books or scrolls. Seeing this, he sighed even more. Dark circles under Alone's eyes had become obvious. He wondered why everyone was working so hard. When the Baron was alive, they worked leisurely and even cut corners. From afar, the elders saw his gloom, waved in alarm. Is he angry? We must work harder. I don't want to die. His complexion paled from overwork. Surely the vassals are working hard because of the rumors that I'm the mastermind. Right? I told you to come, why didn't you? Now Alone is a small company's slave, working silently. He silently hoped they would handle everything themselves. Cut to the scene. The flames flare up and the meat slowly roasts. Evan asked the young master, looking puzzled as he raised his head. I have to say, I'm really surprised. Alone was manipulating magic that floated around the room. Evan continued, to reach rank 2 through 2 years of self-study, exceptional talent. When did you develop like this? He added, normally it takes about 4 years to reach rank 2, and magic can't be used unless you're born with the blessing. Alone replied calmly, maybe I have some gift, because I was worried I trained hard to defend myself. Alone thought to himself that this technique also requires precise mana control. He kept directing the magic to hover around, but the important point was it wasn't complete. Weariness showed on his face. He'd never imagined he'd actually use magic in a fantasy world. He controlled the magic and said quietly, at first I was excited. Once the plan is finished, it won't be dangerous anymore, so I'll just learn more slowly. Immediately after, the magic orb rose, but lately survival had become a real issue. He realized a painful truth that brought tears to his eyes. His mana pool was tiny. Alone sighed, nothing is effective. Then he recalled its description. A person's mana pool at birth is fixed like an athlete's physique, and his mana pool was slightly. Thinking of that caused him intense pain. He realized it was so small that training couldn't help. Sitting and eating, he thought if every other method failed, there was one more option. At that moment, Evan picked up the letter and said, oh right, an invitation to a ball has also arrived for the young master. Hearing that, he turned to look at the ball. The dance had arrived and was being held at the opulent house. Nobles were gathered around. He entered wearing the Baron's attire with Evan at his side. As soon as he entered, he sighed. Phew, I'm tired already. A typical ball to network nobles was being held in the southern region of the Kingdom of Asteria. Since he's about to become a Baron soon, he should probably use this opportunity to build some connections. Alone adjusted the scarf at his neck and stepped in. Evan followed, eating a pile of food as he asked, what are you doing? He thought to himself that getting to know the nobles was important for his future peace. But when Alone approached, everyone nearby was frightened by his appearance and quickly avoided him. Then someone reached out to greet a nearby man, who immediately panicked, and then the whole group scattered like chased by ghosts. Evan beside him couldn't help but laugh and reassure him. Don't take it too hard. Haha. Don't be sad. Watching, Alone thought, sad? Not really, I expected this. So he said, Evan, I'm going home. He turned and walked away, knowing he'd be ignored for lacking prestige. He's not like the old glorious times. Palacio is now the black sheep of the East, but he hadn't come without a plan. Alone raised his wine glass. I'll handle this with the social skills I've secretly practiced. He spoke up. The flavor of this wine is distinctive. A nearby girl turned to look. Her expression grew very wary. He used a low voice. The aroma is unusually different. Alone smiled faintly like a demon. I want to drink a few bottles at home, though inside he thought this was a gentle smile. What's needed for socializing? The girl across saw his face go pale and tremble. She immediately bolted away in panic and said, I'll speak to my father and prepare it at once. Alone watched her go, dazed. Wait. No, he thought to himself. That's not it. People behind him were whispering about Alone. He'd threatened her to get a limited edition bottle, worse than his brothers, more of a thug. Evan beside him couldn't help but clap his shoulder to stifle a laugh. Alone kept denying reality. She must be the shy type. Then they left. Evan said, your spoils have increased again. He munched happily and added, an impressive list. Alone nearby muttered dejectedly, I should learn about wine. Evan began listing the items. A fine horse from Paldeon, Fenian orange tea, metal crafted by Valanda, specialty Malentino wine. Truly an impressive list. Meanwhile, the protagonist brooded. Turns out the name Palacio is worse known than he thought, because rumors said he'd killed his roguish brothers. He seemed to have become someone everyone avoided. So much for socializing. Was it just him, or had he grown more distant from people? He said wearily, I'll go get some fresh air. Evan stood still and replied, yes. Behind him, a red-haired girl quietly watched his direction. She looked at him as if deep in thought, then stepped outside and leaned on the railing to gaze at the view. He couldn't stop wondering, Where did things go wrong? At that moment a voice rang out. Excuse me, may I speak with you for a moment? Alone startled and turned. Someone just spoke to me? Who is it? But when he turned, there was no one in sight, and suddenly another voice sounded. Startled, he looked down, and a petite girl appeared before Alone. She introduced herself. Loria, the third daughter of Duke Altia. Hearing the name, he whispered, Altia, of course. Alone said, yes, hello. The Altia family is one of the three great villains of the waking gods, the black sheep of the north. Alone thought to himself, anyone who comes to talk to me isn't normal. He looked at the small girl and wondered why he didn't remember her. I don't think I've seen her in the game? Loria suddenly said, I'll be blunt, lend me your power. At that, Alone's face before her turned ominously dark. Loria, flustered, continued, I'm going to be assassinated soon. Her words cut through the night, oddly gentle. Loria's expression was full of terror as she looked up. Hearing that, Alone thought inwardly that he'd received his father's affection and had been protected like his illegitimate child until now. Duke Altia had fallen gravely ill. She spoke in panic. But then Altia hesitated and added, my half-sisters are about to kill me. He wondered, so it was all just a survival struggle? Alone looked down and realized why he didn't recognize her. She died when the game began. Loria pleaded urgently, if it's your power, Alone, please. But he answered, I refuse. Loria still tried to speak. I'm not asking you to help me for free, she said anxiously. If you help me, I'll give you half of House Altia. Yet he turned and said, very well, I will take my leave. Alone thought to himself that, pitiful as it was, just staying alive was already hard enough. He shouldn't invite more trouble. Even if he wanted to help, it wouldn't work as the rumors claimed. He had no special power at all. Alone couldn't help but turn and look at the lone figure of the girl standing there. Loria's face was sadly silent. He rubbed his neck and exhaled, then turned back, thinking something good was about to happen for her, hoping she'd find a good ally. He then went back into the party, where two figures in black cloaks were talking nearby. So Altia is approaching the full moon? I should let Crimson Moon know that good things are coming for that one. The woman beside him said, no, that's unnecessary. If the intel is correct, she's the only one in House Altia not tied to Avalon. They're watching Loria from above, which means she isn't a target of Rodmill. He turned away and said, that's fine then. The other Altias will be dealt with. Yes, under Crimson Moon's orders, we'll focus on cutting the information stream so the Avalon incident never reaches him. They watched Alone silently from above. At that moment he was in the pity party. The surroundings felt so empty. Could it be I'm surrounded by some sort of barrier? Alone didn't notice a mysterious girl nearby. She said, hello. Alone was moved when he heard someone start a conversation. Was that addressed to me? Really? Could it be this time I can actually get close to a noble? He turned and replied, yes, hello. The girl held a fan over her mouth and smiled faintly. At the sight of him, she immediately confirmed. Again? Another shady one? I've seen that face in the game before. As he looked at her, he thought anyone who approached him first definitely wasn't an ordinary noble. Recognizing her, he went over and said, hello, Miss Zenonia. Seeing him recognize her, Kalia was surprised. Oh my, you know me? He said calmly, of course, you're quite famous. The three most notorious villainous houses in the kingdom of Asteria. To the north was House Altia, to the east was House Palatio, and finally to the west was the decadent House Zenonia. She evoked the image of a noble serpent. Kalia smiled lightly. Famous? Me? She was the eldest daughter of Count Zenonia. If Palatio was a gang, Zenonia was its upscale version, the corporate legalized mafia. Thinking about it made him shiver. I just need a few noble connections to live peacefully, he vowed inwardly. Even though half my life is already hanging by a thread, for this sweet life I must absolutely avoid entanglement with them. Alone said to her, because you are so beautiful. Kalia replied, thank you for the compliment. She smiled and said, I'd like to talk more. What do you think? Alone replied calmly, I would too, but there are too many eyes watching. In his heart he prayed, please let me leave quietly. Kalia looked at him and said something cryptic, just as rumored. Huh. Then she turned and walked away. I look forward to seeing you again soon, which left him puzzled. Kalia then walked off in another direction. Alone stared after her, bewildered. What the hell just happened? Two people above watched and said, regarding the Avalon incident, it's completely sealed off here, and the other added, however, a new speaker has appeared. They looked toward the window where someone was hiding in a tree, continuing to observe him. A tail? Then two small figures darted off. No direct orders yet, so we'll keep observing. If necessary, we can handle it. Cut to Evan scratching his head in confusion. "Young master, are you sure this time it's real?" They stood before a ravine. Evan was doubtful. "Is this the ravine we've been searching for all this time?" He continued, "Though it's daytime, it's strangely dark inside, and the surface looks like it's about to ascend." He clenched his fists. "We finally found it. This is our true target. The environmental effects match, so it's definitely here." Evan complained, "If this turns out to be fake again, I'll go into depression." They entered and surveyed the area. There were inscriptions on the stones, and he replied, "This time it's real." In the game, this place was much easier to find. The real reason he had come all this way under the guise of a reconnaissance mission was the southern maze. That maze was called the Whispering Labyrinth. Solve the puzzles in all 8 rooms and you receive a sacred relic as a reward. Alone smiled and looked ahead. I still remember all the instructions and the exhilarating grind for gear. Before them stood a massive gate carved with strange characters. He looked up and marveled, seeing the labyrinth entrance in real life. Even though I was sick of this place in the game, standing before it now feels completely different. Evan exclaimed in astonishment. "This ravine looks like it was hand-carved by people. How do you know places like this?" He looked up and said, "I've been here many times." Hearing that, Evan was puzzled. "You've been here many times?" "Daydreaming again now," he said. "I'm joking, I have my own ways. Come on, look at that creepy face." Evan cried out, "Please don't say things like that with such a serious expression." As soon as they went inside, they heard the monster's roar from above. Its massive hands clenched together, producing a terrifying sound. Evan looked around and said in awe, "In a place like this it feels like one wrong answer and you'd be crushed." Alone remained silent, assessing. Horrible sounds continued to reverberate. Evan was stunned, watching him emotionlessly write something on the stone tablet. How can he stay so calm? He watched his expression intently as he wrote those cryptic lines. Even in a situation like this, Evan recalled everything that had happened. They'd been together 4 years and he still couldn't understand him. No 2 missions were the same. Repaying someone's debt, helping a slave rescue an orphan, destroying a demonic organization, delivering a meaningless letter. At that moment, the monster still seemed unfinished, and he wondered how Alone knew this place so well when he'd never left home. Alone calmly pointed at the creature and said, "The puzzle sequence is correct, but it hasn't opened yet. We have to wait for that thing to finish." The sounds kept echoing. Evan kept thinking, yet following this mysterious young master always led to something good. They both looked over. Alone said, "Oh, it's opening." Evan silently cried out in his mind, "What are you planning this time, young master?" Deep down he was silently yelling. Finally it opened. "Oh God, I feel like vomiting. I knew this place was tough, but I didn't expect it to be this brutal. I nearly broke my neck trying not to look." Then before them was a pile of precious jewelry lighting up the whole chamber. Evan cried out, "It's finally over, right?" Alone said calmly, "Yeah, take the black ring and let's go." Off in the distance 6 rings were mounted on a fake hand. Seeing that, Evan said, "That thing looks useless and scary." Alone picked up the black ring and said, "It's a bit large, but touching the other items would only bring more trouble. Leave them be." He silently looked at the ring and thought, "Finally got the restraint band." Alone added, "Don't worry, the way back is safe." Evan stammered, "Yes." Walking, he relaxed, thinking that remembering the game's guide made this too easy. Yet his expression soured. "Young master, did you anticipate all of this?" Before them stood a group of giant golems. So the stone fields in that ravine were actually golems. Evan worriedly calculated inwardly. Unknown enemies? Great, we at least need a way to get him out of here. Alone stepped forward and said directly, "I'll handle this time." Hearing that, he was bewildered, and at that moment all the monsters turned toward them. Evan warned, "Whatever you plan, priority 1 is to get out of here alive." One of them lunged to attack. He shouted, "Wait, level 2 magic probably won't be enough." At that instant he murmured, "Bindings, activate." The ring on his hand flashed a black light. Immediately the golems seemed to change as light flared. Then a voice rang out in the air. "Fragment. Inherit the great will of Mala. Speak the 2 limits you can develop." Alone stood within an inky black space. He began to look around. In the game this would bring up a choice window, so that's where that voice came from. A massive face materialized from the darkness. It was the reward for clearing the binding maze. As the name suggests, it was a relic that absorbs power for the user, but in return imposes strict constraints. Alone trembled slightly, tense inside. That voice sounded so real, as if he were truly inside the world. He spoke. "The first limitation." The other responded. Alone continued with his hands. "In all surgeries, the hand seals of Babylonia are absolutely mandatory." The voice asked, "What do you wish to gain from this binding?" He answered, "The power to bend the world's rules a little more." Lines of power in the air began to intertwine. "Granted." Evan looked up at the pitch-black scene. Gradually light appeared. He said, "The second limitation." The voice continued, "Speak." Alone formed another seal and said, "In all surgeries, only the sacred tongue of Babylonia may be used?" The voice asked again, "And what do you wish from this binding?" He replied calmly, "The same as before." The voice fell into a brief silence. Alone looked up, perplexed. "Damn, did I miss a step?" Even the skill icon copied it exactly. Choosing both the seals and the sacred tongue as limits yields the strongest offensive power. He couldn't help sweating with worry. He'd mastered all the seals and incantations from playing over and over, so this had to succeed. Shortly after, the voice accepted. The words echoed vaguely in the air. "O human who remembers the seals and runes of the great forgotten god, we express gratitude to the successor of his will." Alone was puzzled. Successor of his will? What does that mean? Immediately the ring on his hand vanished. He guessed the ring was being absorbed. Seems the binding succeeded. The voice spoke one last time. "I have always watched over you. You inherit that will." Back in reality, Evan shouted, "Young master, level 2 magic. There are those giant monsters in front of you." He reached out, worry evident but insufficient. Alone looked up calmly, his eyes without a ripple. His hand began to initiate the magic. The iron orb that should have blazed brilliantly only glowed faintly despite him pouring all his mana into it. No matter how much he trained, he couldn't break the limit. Then it was time to test the binding's power and its cost. With that thought, the protagonist formed a magic orb in his palm. The orb continued to gather more and more. The monsters were charging in. Alone raised his hand to steer the magic orb straight ahead. Time to test it. Alone immediately produced the magic orb. Done, he tossed the orb into the air. The seal's limit and the price for it. When the refraction technique activated, the orb transformed into a faint, wavering blue flame. Next came the countershock technique. Sparks of lightning repeatedly struck the cavern's ley lines. The orb grew ever brighter within the dark space. With the blue light technique, the orb expanded and spun, releasing chained bolts of lightning all around. Finally, with the linear diffraction technique, Alone deftly executed the hand motions of the spell. A powerful surge of electricity shot from his hand. The electric current struck directly at those who were pursuing them. Evan watched the scene in stunned amazement. Lightning and electric arcs whipped wildly across the pursuers. The lightning subsided, but the currents hadn't fully dissipated. The giants were struck rigid and motionless, and Alone and Evan stood on the cliff in silence watching them. After only a few seconds of quiet, another volley of lightning erupted, sweeping the stone giants. Their limbs came apart and tumbled down. Sparks flashed and then slowly faded. Alone and Evan stood on the cliff looking down as the once mighty giants were now only shattered rock fragments. Alone's face showed no change, while Evan still looked dazed and not quite composed, muttering under his breath, "Damn. Unbelievable." They waited for the currents below the cliff to clear, then descended together. All the way down, Evan kept nagging Alone, asking if he'd been hiding his true power the whole time, and Alone only replied casually, "No way." Evan stubbornly refused to believe it and pressed him. "What do you mean? After 15 years as a mercenary, I've never seen anything like that. Are you telling me that was really only level 2 magic?" But Alone's bland 2-word answer, "Yes," left him powerless and speechless. Contrary to Alone's icy, emotionless expression, he was full of inner turmoil. "I don't know either. It wasn't that strong in the game, if I remember correctly." In Psychedelia's turn-based combat system, spells can be enhanced each turn by seals or chance, a turn-based framework, and every victory completing a battle grants the character in the virtual world a 10% attack boost. In the fight just now against the stone giants, it was a chain lightning spell using 4 seals and incantations. It was amplified over 5 turns. The more he thought, the more Alone unconsciously recalled each technique he'd used in that fight. He'd used 4 total moves, the accumulated lightning amplified simultaneously, forming the proper configuration for a widespread grand lightning technique. In exchange for the restriction forcing me to use a primary seal and incantation for every spell, I gained something else. Mentioning that, Alone vaguely imagined a voice humming strange phrases in his head. "O forgotten mortal who still remembers the seals and mysteries of the great god, I thank you for inheriting his will." Thinking that, he drew a conclusion for himself. That's probably why the spells were amplified many times over. Throughout the walkout, Alone's mind churned with thoughts. Nevertheless, the power of this level 2 magic was more than necessary. The result far exceeded my expectations to the point that even I was surprised. Evan followed behind him and finally let out a relieved sigh. We're finally out. He slumped wearily onto a stone ledge against the cliff and muttered complaints. This was more exhausting than fighting. Fatigued and in a foul mood, Evan half scolded, half asked Alone, "Who on earth designed a place this terrible?" Alone didn't answer. He glanced around. He fell into thought again. On reflection, the Whispering Maze has another name. According to what he'd found online, it spread through the community via shared map downloads and guidebooks. Discussion about this mysterious maze was rampant on social media. What's Palaon Maze? People kept asking. Palon. What the hell is it? The Whispering Maze was a mid-level grinding area in the game. According to the director, that maze had an owner. You could grind there indefinitely if you ignored the rewards, and at some point it started being called Palaon's Maze. This question made Alone restless, and he unconsciously blurted out, "When did it start being called Palaon's Maze?" Evan half heard and, not understanding, asked, "Sorry, what did you say?" Alone didn't repeat it. He pulled Evan up and deflected, "Let's head east. After 3 weeks of hard training, there's something I want to do when we get back." Hearing that, Evan couldn't help but helplessly sigh. "What? You've been more diligent than I thought." As he pulled Evan away, Alone kept musing. Choosing seals aligned with the spell increases power, and choosing the right incantation enhances the attribute. That's how the game mechanics work. But unlike the game, where visuals don't change and only attack stats increase, each victory grants the player a 10% attack boost. Yet from the recent battle, Alone realized that this time each seal actually altered the spell. Every incantation produced a noticeable change, and thinking that, Alone wondered to himself, just now it was only a spell technique. Could my mana control be refined enough to perceive those changes? Shaking off the tangled thoughts, Alone finally relaxed and told himself that once his mana recovered, he'd have to test it again. In any case, everything had worked out in the end. In the deep, dark forest night, unnoticed by Alone and Evan, Rhine wrapped her cloak tight and hid in the shadows. She waited until they left, then lifted her head. Swiftly, she leaped from cliff to cliff and entered the maze. When she arrived, she stopped. Rhine looked at the large stone covered in raised colored inscriptions. After all, everything had worked out in the end, and she recognized immediately that these unusual characters were the script of the Alanar Empire. Rhine removed her hood and cloak and translated the strange inscription, which read, "For a friend about to be left alone, the holy sword Palaon stood firm." Then she gently touched the raised colored lettering. Vivid images ran through Rhine's mind. He had repelled the invasion of the Dark Pretender and defeated Alekalaka, who devoured his people's hearts. The glorious emperor, Great Palaon, remained beloved by his subjects, boldly wielding the divine sword to fight the monstrous dragon. Then the reel spun to an image of Rhine herself floating overhead, books flying around her, and a voice echoing in her head reminding her, "I know everything, for I was born with a great mission in the ancient library." Back in the present, Rhine remembered standing on the cliff watching Alone, and it dawned on her. Yes, Palaon was the one who created it. I already knew Empress Bloodia differed from the figure in history, so I suspected something extraordinary. Images of Empress Bloodia, Emperor Great Palaon, and Alone swirled in Rhine's head. She couldn't stop the thoughts racing through her mind. After all, even the Great Moon once called Palaon a friend worthy of reverence. Moreover, the incantation he whispered doesn't even exist in any record of the ancient library. Recalling Alone's recent fight with the giants, the spells he used troubled Rhine the most. She was intensely curious who that man really was. When she exited the maze, Rhine's demeanor shifted slightly. Bashfully she murmured that everything Hong Noyet said was true. "I am ashamed for having blindly followed orders." But her expression immediately turned cold again, as if asking and asserting, "So you have arrived." Looking up at the figure on the branch, Rhine asked him, "Did you get any information?" Deus replied coolly, "No, the man in black is dead." His neck was suddenly twisted twice in midair, and that was Alone's handiwork. After hearing this, Rhine briefly said she would report the matter for proper handling. In the late night, the pale moon hung high, and through the forest canopy 2 figures shot away into the sky. At the Zenonia Count's manor, Kalia sat on the sofa in a room. She took a small sip of tea, her gaze distant, and said nonchalantly, "So it's not just a rumor." Kalia fell into thought, unconsciously recalling Alone and silently remarking that his eyes were cold and emotionless, like a bottomless abyss. She asked herself sarcastically, "Famous? Huh?" Then leaned back in her chair, answering her own question. Indeed, Count Zenonia is both powerful and prestigious. However, Kalia's sharp gaze dimmed as she remarked, strangely, "For someone who seldom socializes, you are the one everyone considers famous." Saying that, Kalia stood and slowly walked toward the man seated at his desk, smiling as she asked, "Isn't it odd, Father?" At her call, the man paused his writing and turned to look at her. He studied Kalia seriously as she continued, because you are the count, after all. Kalia stepped close to her father, gave a faint, cold smile, then snapped her fingers. The light in the man's eyes, reflecting Kalia, flickered and twitched. He went limp and slumped forward, the brush in his hand dropping loosely. Seeing this, Kalia smiled with supreme satisfaction and scoffed inwardly, arrogantly thinking that no one would suspect she was the one truly running the house while her father pretended to be a fool. Recalling the banquet when Alone hadn't known the watcher in the distance was arranged by her, and had kindly warned her that many eyes were watching, Kalia had inwardly delighted. Even the spy I planted seems to have been discovered. At that moment, a guard burst in, panicked, calling, "Miss Kalia!" Kalia leaned against the wall, hands on her hips, asking him what was the matter. The guard immediately reported, "Miss, please return to your room at once." Kalia followed the guard back to her room, and upon opening the door she was met with the sight of the spy, bloodied and dead, collapsed against the wall. The guard cautiously informed Kalia that the seal hadn't been triggered, meaning he hadn't revealed his secret. Kalia said sternly that he had deliberately placed it in her room, then fell silent, leaving the sentence unfinished. A few seconds later, Kalia laughed and mocked herself. How did they find out about this? From the moment we met, they hit my biggest weakness, didn't they? Kalia smiled without smiling, her face contorted with anger to the point of being ugly. At that moment, on Evan and Alone's side, the two of them were dozing on the way back. Evan's snoring was so loud that Alone dozed off and on, poking at his ear before drifting back to sleep. Cut to another location. Night at the Altia Dukedom estate. Loria sat in the carriage, terrified. Clearly she was no ordinary person. She recalled the underworld benefactor, his cold eyes like her father's. This was someone you absolutely could not cross. Loria sadly remembered when Alone turned away indifferently. He was my last lifeline. She was filled with despair. But would he really accept such a disastrously lopsided deal? Loria thought of her siblings, how the weakest brothers had seized all the wealth and power. Timalian the eldest son, Mali and the eldest daughter, Perrine the third daughter, Kig the third son. Looking at herself, she thought inwardly that she had nothing left. Loria gazed at the opulent building, familiar yet alien, and thought, until now I've barely survived by exploiting my father's pity and love. What am I to do from here? She had no choice but to step into that cold mansion. Suddenly a loud call rang out. Miss Loria, the youngest lady has returned. Two maids rushed over anxiously. Miss Perrine and Master Kig. They're dead. At those words Loria's face went pale. What? The images of those two flashed through her mind. People willing to stab their own family. Them? Impossible. Loria quietly asked. Then what about Brother Timalian and Sister Malian? Immediately a horrible scream echoed. The household staff rushed toward the sound, each of them panic-stricken. Inside, the two were stabbing at each other with swords. Master Timalian, Miss Marianne. The scene descended into chaos. Loria stood frozen, wondering what was happening. They didn't know that a small figure on the roof had slipped away like lightning. Raiden smiled coldly, job done. Then that figure leapt away and vanished without a trace. The servants were now running everywhere in panic. She muttered, finally. Loria's frightened expression recalled Alone's words. He had said one puzzling thing before leaving. It will turn out well. Alone's expression then had been terrifying. He'd hidden himself, waiting for the moment, concealing his claws to seize power. The true puppeteer behind the Count's family. At that Loria trembled with fear. Do you mean that, like him, in just one night I became the sole heir of the ducal family? After a moment, Loria exhaled softly. She wondered inwardly how deep a bargain she had signed with such an unreasonable devil. But there was no turning back. Loria immediately turned and walked away. What would happen if she betrayed him? There were already too many precedents. She made up her mind. I have no choice but to continue down the path I've chosen. Time moved ahead 2 months to Alone's mansion. A man approached respectfully. I come at the order of Duke Altia. Hearing that, Alone was astonished. Duke Altia? Evan standing nearby poked his head in and exclaimed. Looking inside, it was a bottle of apparently very rare wine. The Cernant's vintage, rumored to cost thousands of gold per bottle. To see one in person was unexpected. Along with it came a letter. Alone was surprised, to Loria Altia. Not to the Duke but to Loria, the youngest daughter. Prepared? Why send this to me when I'm on the run, struggling to survive? He looked up and asked the man, was this really sent to me? The man bowed his head and replied, yes. The Duke himself prepared it and ordered me to deliver it directly to your hands. At that, Alone suddenly started. The Duke, personally? Wait, so that means Loria, the youngest daughter. Even he hadn't expected it, she had become Duke Altia. At this moment she was focused on paperwork at the desk. After a while Loria stretched and said, 2 months have flown by. She couldn't help recalling. After father's funeral, he died of illness. I held the succession ceremony and became duke. Loria rose, marveling that at first I couldn't even enter this office. She could never forget that horrific night. Though her siblings' deaths were sudden, I escaped all suspicion. At the time, Loria was constantly uneasy, with her alibi being the ball, and even my secret organization wiped out by my siblings. So when I returned to the mansion, that day should have been when she was in greatest danger. I was truly stripped of all power. Loria couldn't help feeling bewildered and terrified. By the time she realized it was too late, I was stunned. Had he exploited the situation? She pictured the scene in her mind. Outwardly, he refused coldly, yet afterward he handled everything flawlessly. Remembering it, Loria remained unsettled. How many moves ahead had he been? For fear of troubling anyone, I didn't even announce the funeral. So she walked alone through the magnificent mansion. Clearly, he needed Altia for some plan, which is why he sought me out. As she walked, Loria thought that although she'd consolidated all the organizations under Altia, they still couldn't match the power he hid. She quietly suspected he wanted something else from her. Alone's image rose in her mind. Palacio, an underworld boss who built his influence through business. If it was something he lacked but I possessed, his image in her eyes darkened further, manipulating the political scene from the shadows. Altia's reputation, what was going on? Then Loria looked up at the portrait on the wall and said to herself, "For now I must focus on what needs to be done." She turned to stand before the Duke's painting, convinced that her benefactor would contact her soon. Loria smiled faintly, hoping the thank you gift had pleased him. On the other side, the man bowed and left the Duke's room. "I will take my leave." Alone remained puzzled. Loria had been threatened with murder, yet now she was the Duke? And what else? Evan beside him tilted his head in curiosity. It was all very strange. Time shifted to a few months later, winter, 5 years before the principal began. Alone was walking when someone suddenly called out, "Young master." Evan ran over and asked, "Young master, no, now your account, right?" He replied, "The inheritance ceremony hasn't happened yet, but the new year has arrived, so one can use the title." Inside, Alone felt a twinge of gloom. My perfect life plan didn't include becoming a Count. Suicidal's rules: conquer Radamil, avoid inheritance struggles, travel in American style. Still, he didn't dwell on it. This was familiar, so he could enjoy the perks of nobility to the fullest. Warable was even better than he expected. Evan then handed him a letter. "This is a letter from Yusha." As they entered the room, Alone asked, "By the way, is there any news about the assassins yet?" He answered, "Nothing definitive yet. The Intelligence Council is investigating thoroughly. We'll wait and see." They sat at the table and Evan asked, "So what's your purpose, sir? It's not for revenge, is it?" He thought to himself that the gradual changes from the game were probably a butterfly effect caused by him. Alone said, "It's just to guard against unforeseen situations." Evan on the other side suddenly laughed in admiration. "You just looked very much like a count." He sighed at that and said, "Fine, let's go with that." Alone looked at the letter with curiosity, wondering what it contained this time. At that moment, the letter's contents appeared. "How are you? We're all well as always. Everyone is immersed in their hobbies. In particular, Deuce's puppet play has now reached a truly high level." The others on that side were also very cheerful. Sealang is completely absorbed in gaming with friends. Then the letter mentioned the other members. Ryan quietly reads a lot these days but keeps making things, and Raiden has taken a liking to landscape design. After reading the letter, Alone smiled gently. Daily life at the orphanage, where monthly correspondence was customary, had warmed him more and more. Though he'd never seen their faces, watching the children grow with his support made him smile like a father. Then he suddenly asked Evan, "By the way, the 5 youngsters, how old are they now?" Evan, curious, asked why he wanted to know. Evan answered, "It's almost time for them to enter society. Some have already left the orphanage early. Most of those you ordered to be found personally are around that age." Hearing this, the pristine image Alone had of them in his head seemed to crack a bit. He couldn't help recalling that scene. "Thank you for raising us," they wrote, signed by the 5. Alone immediately thought, "Right, that's how it is. We'll have to let them out into the world gradually." Evan asked again, "Really? Weren't you intentionally gathering those vulnerable kids?" Alone replied calmly, "There was no ulterior motive. They've grown up now and we must think of their future." But inwardly he thought differently. Having been cared for so they wouldn't awaken to evil, they should be able to take care of themselves. Evan remarked, "They all seem healthy now, I see." Alone began to think. In each boss encounter, the narration revealed a sketch of their abilities. Yusha has talent in faith. Next was that gloomy kid, Deus, who has talent in swordsmanship. Then Rhine, who has talent in research. Then the beast child Sealang has talent in combat. And Raiden has talent as an envoy. Alone suddenly lifted the box. If he placed them in the right positions, wouldn't they be capable of taking a role? He thought of those kids and quietly reasoned that since he was doing it anyway, giving each of them a gift might please them. After all, he'd promised to give them something someday. After a while, time shifted to late afternoon, sunlight from the sunset spilling over the mansion. Alone sat at his desk, stretched and said, "All done." Evan, still drooling a bit, ran off saying, "I'll be going then." Alone watched him go and thought to himself whether, if things went smoothly, he'd get even a small share of the benefits. Outside, small birds flew peacefully across the sky. Children, he thought, take these letters and move out into the wider world. But the scene cut to the children in Alone's words, and it read like a command. Yusha lowered her cold face and said, "The orders have arrived. This time it's special, sent to each of us individually." At that moment all 5 were holding their own letters. Deus read his with the same cold composure, while Sealang jumped around in uncontained joy at seeing the letter. They no longer looked as small as before. Ryan gave a gentle smile and Raiden said nothing. Yusha lowered her eyes and stared at the letter with an unreadable expression. In the room everyone gathered, focusing on the paper in their hands. The orders had arrived, and this time he had sent them individually to each of us. Sealang suddenly leapt up in joy. Hooray! Raiden and Ryan held their letters but remained pensive and said nothing. Yusha held the letters in her hands and said calmly, "But before we do anything, we should read through the previous letters first, because his orders demand a very high level of skill." Sealang perked up at her words. "Can we really read them?" "Before, only you could read them, Yusha." Yusha replied in her even tone. "The fact that he issued orders to each of us means he's decided it's time for everyone to see them." The letter opened and Yusha began to read. "How have you been lately? It seems you have many talented friends. If you need anything, just tell me." Sealang scratched his cheek as he looked at the letter, feeling puzzled. "Is this an order?" Ryan, after reading for a while, also found it strange. It sounded more like routine pleasantries. Yusha scoffed at their comments. "Exactly. He's been disguising his orders as casual conversation from the start." "All right, look." She analyzed the letter for them. "This is the first order following the greeting letter. It says, 'Yusha, are you well?' I'm fine. Today my brother used me as a chair. Funny, isn't it? Sometimes I want to write to you. Reply if you're okay with that. And the child I sent this time," Yusha explained, "he designates targets to be eliminated, assigns missions, and tells us to report back afterward." The letter continued, "Thanks for replying. I hope you can tell me what happens at the orphanage each month. I'm leaving that place to you. Together you'll be fine." Yusha went on to explain the hidden command behind the letter. "This is when he entrusts Lam Noyet to me. As you can see, he personally selected each of you." Then she pointed to parts for analysis, and everyone around made O-shaped mouths in stunned surprise. Deus, hearing Yusha, appeared to understand. "I get it, it's to prevent information leaks. I remember my first order." She smiled and added, "Like this, you must fully understand the order and carry out the mission." Deus, having heard Yusha, said he understood. "I see, it's to stop information leakage. I remember my first order." She smiled and continued, "Exactly like that. You must understand the order thoroughly and execute the mission." Suddenly Yusha's demeanor changed. Her face grew serious and her eyes flashed with a cold light. "I hope you haven't forgotten," she said, "that all we must do is follow the orders." Deus was struck silent by Yusha's unwavering loyalty, a steady faith that sent chills down his spine. "I haven't forgotten," he said. Then Sealang raised his paper high and shouted excitedly, "Then let's read the orders together." The room was brightly lit. They formed a circle to read the orders that had been sent individually to each of them. Deus read his assignment aloud. He was told to go to Caliban, the Kingdom of Knights. Sealang sighed dejectedly. "A colony? But I don't like the desert." Raiden continued, "I'm assigned to Raxus, the entertainment city. Ryan was sent elsewhere. He told me to go to Larthania, the labyrinth city." Yusha's gaze suddenly became entranced. She clutched the order to her chest with rapture. "The holy nation, Rosario. Everything we need to do is written in the letter, right?" Deus held the order in his hand and said in an emotionless voice, "I don't know the reason, but he told me to become a knight." Sealang, thrilled, added that the patronage would continue and there was no need to worry. Ryan smiled and added, "He also told us the locations of the gifts." Raiden seemed pleased as well. "Whatever they are, we'll find out once we get there." Seeing that they understood the orders, Yusha cautioned, "Good. But remember, unless he explicitly says otherwise, you must never mention the name Lam Noyet." Yusha's gaze turned icy as she stared at them with a deadly chill. The group quickly followed the orders and dispersed, moving to various places. They donned black cloaks and departed from the mansion. 3 months later, in a room piled high with ledgers and documents, Alone sat in the study and read. Sure enough, There was nothing about changes to magic or incantations. He'd have to test them himself. He suddenly turned to Evan and asked, "By the way, any progress on gathering information about who killed Leo?" Evan replied, "The Intelligence Guild says they still haven't found anything." Alone, hearing this, felt a bit disappointed. "Is that so?" He propped his chin on his hand and thought, "It seems the butterfly effect has already slipped beyond my control, the result of saving the 5 great sinners." Alone recalled the image of the cold Duchess Loria. Even Loria herself, who should have died in the original story, had become Duchess Altia, expanding her power and influence at an astonishing pace in the underworld, and the more he thought, the darker his expression grew. Alone set the book down and ordered Evan, "Stop the investigation into the assassin." Evan, shocked by the command, replied, "Huh? Really?" Alone privately considered that sometimes ignorance is bliss. In this setting, almost nothing escapes the Intelligence Guild's network. The more he thought about digging into things better left alone, the more frightened he became. Alone's face went pale. After all, if excessive caution against surprises only leads to death, then it's pointless. To protect himself, Alone had no other option. Secret organizations like that won't harm you as long as you don't meddle in their affairs. There's no reason for them to attack unless you approach them first. Alone told Evan, "At this rate, there's no benefit in continuing." Though he didn't understand Alone's motive, Evan agreed. "All right, I'll tell them to halt the investigation." Evan suddenly remembered a piece of news and hurried to tell Alone. "Oh right, there's another report. It seems Deus was recently knighted in Caliban." Alone listened with a blank face but politely offered congratulations. "Really? Congratulations to him." 3 months later, Evan came rushing to Alone carrying a pile of food. "Count," Alone whispered, impressed by Evan's versatility, "you're talented." Then Evan told Alone the news. "Listen, Deus has formed an entire squad of knights." Alone was stunned at the news. "What? Then he must at least be at expert level or higher." Alone recalled the knightly ranks of this world: Master Swordsman, Expert Swordsman, Blade Wielder, and marveled. It hadn't been long since Deus was first knighted. Evan added that people were saying the world might see the 5th Great Knight within less than 10 years. Alone suddenly remembered. "When you say Great Knight, you mean those called the Blades of Caliban, right?" Evan confirmed it. "Yes, he's truly talented." Alone felt a pang of pride. "I'm rather proud of him." Evan, chewing, added, "Caliban must be buzzing about this." 6 months later, in a magnificent castle, Alone was engrossed in work. A year had passed since the 5 great sinners left the orphanage, and just as he was settling into his duties as Count, Evan entered with news. "My Lord Count, I've just heard something very new." Alone kept working as Evan continued. "It seems Deus has become a Blade of Caliban." The announcement struck Alone like a bolt from the blue, making him drop the pen in his hand. Deus had become the 5th Great Knight. Alone found the news hard to believe and asked again, "But only a Master Swordsman can become a Great Knight, right?" He recalled what he knew about becoming a knight here. The Master Swordsman of Psychedelia was a superhuman who transcended sword chi and unlocked a unique ability called manifestation. Alone asked Evan, "So you mean Deus is already a Master Swordsman?" Evan corrected him. "More accurately, he's about to become one. He hasn't manifested his own ability yet." Evan recounted Deus's rise to knighthood, but in any case the nation had bestowed on him the title of Great Knight, not only because he won the duel against the 4th Blade, but also because Caliban had lost a Great Knight to the northern barbarians. Hearing that, Alone suddenly realized, of course they'd been at war for over a decade. He scratched his head. Even Evan found it hard to believe. Sensing and mastering mana takes 15 years, and the manifestation process needs at least several decades. He recalled the Empire's history. The first Blade, Reinhardt, was 32 when he became the youngest Great Knight in history. The history of the heroic knight was recounted. Chapter 3. Accepted as a temporary comrade, to be eliminated after the chapter ends. Reinhardt. I have wielded a sword since I was 5. Have a little faith that I'll become the youngest Master Swordsman in history. Alone thought to himself, that's right. Reinhardt is unbelievably strong. Even with his talent it would normally take over 20 years. So how could a child with no formal sword knowledge become a great knight? Suddenly an idea struck him. Wait. If the boy is merely awaiting his manifestation, might that mean he'll soon surpass Reinhardt and become a Master Swordsman? The thought delighted Alone so much he blurted it out. Maybe I can ride on his coattails sooner than expected. Evan nodded in agreement. Alone stared at the messy pile of books on the desk and fell into thought. Or maybe not. Perhaps it's impossible. Evan hastily waved his hand. No, he wouldn't do that. Alone revealed a truth, pulling the single letter tucked in the book out. I mean, I'm the only one who's received letters from Yusha. He read Yusha's letter aloud. Even after arriving at the holy nation, the letters she sent regularly contained news about the great sinners she grew up with. It seemed they were still in contact. Alone felt a pang of loss. Though they had never seen him before, they could at least have thanked him for the gift. He felt a bit guilty. He slapped his face hard to clear his head. Evan watched the action in horror and said, "Back to the main point. I'm already deeply grateful that they didn't destroy the kingdom after awakening as the 5 great sinners." The two stood shoulder to shoulder by the sunny window. Alone said reluctantly, "As long as they're living well, I'm already happy." Late afternoon over Caliban's capital, the central Kirtham district, the mansion of a high noble. This was the great residence housing the renowned solar cavalry. Inside, numerous swordsmen were training at the moment. Deus, clad in armor, stood proudly on high observing the scene. He was introduced as Deus Michaelian, captain of the solar cavalry and the youngest great knight. From above, Deus looked down at the knights below with a cold gaze. Then a girl walking below noticed him. The little purple-haired girl waved at Deus, "Big brother." Seeing that, he smiled and waved back at the girl. Suddenly Deus's expression darkened. Sadly, he remembered. It's been exactly 1 year, and he still felt ashamed when he thought about it. When he had lost everything to those dark ones, that horrific image kept replaying in his mind. The painful images of his childhood surged back, and all that remained of him was an uncontrollable rage. The image of his sister swallowed by darkness, slowly slipping from his arms. Deus was held back by the darkness, the distance between him and his sister growing ever wider, and hatred welled up within Deus. The miserable wandering of his childhood resurfaced. Though he languished in suffering, he still clutched his sister's hairpin in his hand. Deus's true thoughts gradually emerged. The truth that de Noyet saved his life was not sufficient reason alone to swear loyalty to her. But because she promised he could take revenge with his own hands, he obeyed orders under the name Lam Noyet. From that moment, he began selling his life to Lam Noyet, serving as part of Lam Noyet, which meant enduring many dangerous missions and rigorous training. Though he was constantly close to death, Deus didn't care because of his quest for vengeance. He paid no mind to his own safety. Memories rushed over him like a torrent. Over several years he carried out missions that would form the foundation for fighting the dark, and soon after, for the first time, he received a secret order of his own. Deus was utterly surprised to receive a private secret order. This was completely unexpected. "What is this?" In the letter alone revealed, "A small in south of Caliban. I left a gift there, go take a look." But Deus didn't pay it much mind. The gift didn't particularly interest him. Still, he went to the spot Alone mentioned. Deus was a little curious. Maybe there was something there. When he opened the door, the scene inside stunned him into silence. Exactly as described in that unexpected letter. Seeing the familiar figure of his little sister, Deus hurriedly ran toward her. His hand reached out, wanting to touch her. The gift from de Noyet. "The family I thought was lost forever." Deus hugged the girl tightly and collapsed to the ground from joy and emotion. The girl hugged him back, tears streaming with emotion. "More precious to me than my own life." And Deus sobbed uncontrollably, soundless.
Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more awesome content.